Well, I'd like to welcome you to week 3 of Theology 3. And I just wanted to take a brief moment to just kind of briefly go over what we looked at in this past week and to kind of introduce us to the topic that we're going to be reflecting, studying, and looking at in week 3. So I just wanted to make sure and let you know how grateful I was for the lively interaction that we experienced in last week's class during the discussion forums, and I was very pleased with how the interaction was there and how you were able to respond and discuss, reflect on the topics that we were looking at last week, and how you were able to interact with one another and really dig a little deeper into the topic of sin and how and what that looks like and the importance of having a good understanding of what sin is, because I think it kind of ties in with a lot of what we will continue to look at in, as far as systematic theology is concerned, looking at how what man is incapable of, and it will kind of tie into when we look at anthropology as well, is the main barrier that comes between man and God is this notion of sin, and that man needs a way in which to overcome that hurdle or that boundary, that chasm that comes between man and God. And that's why these subjects are tied together, but they are so intricately interwoven with one another that it makes sense to group them together. We look at anthropology, we look at hamartiology, we look at the idea of soteriology when we understand what comes together as far as our salvation is concerned. So, without jumping too far ahead, we looked at last week, this was the week that we just wrapped up, we looked at a brief introduction to the doctrine of sin, and most importantly, we looked at the doctrine of original sin, how man came to the strained, broken, severed relationship that he has with God to begin with. We looked at how important it is to have that clear understanding of what it means to be broken before God and what it means to not be able to initiate a relationship with God on one's own. And this week we're going to uh, go to part 2 of our discussion of sin. And we have an understanding of what it means to for a man be to possess a sin nature and not to be able to have a relationship with God because of that sin nature. But this week we're going to take that a step further and help us to understand what it means when a believer sins. What are the implications of that? What are the ramifications of and consequences of when we do have a relationship with Christ and we still sin? Why do we still sin? What are the consequences of it? Are we held in judgment? Are we punished for those sins just like an unbeliever is? And so as you read and reflect on uh, the Ryrie text and also looking at another article out of Grudem's systematic theology, we're going to get a better understanding of what lies for a believer after he becomes a believer, and when he sins, what are those kinds of consequences? And so during our discussion this week and in your other assignments, we're going to be reflecting on that. We're going to be looking at Scripture and to see how we can understand clearly from a biblical perspective of what happens when a believer sins and why he sins. So I'm looking forward to yet another lively week of interaction in the discussion forum this week. And again, if you have any other further questions, I'd be more than happy to field those questions as well. And possibly this week, if your schedule works out, maybe we can further discuss these in a different format as well. Next week, I plan on having a scheduled Google Hangout where we can just kind of take some time and just breathe and look at some of these topics that we've been looking at, possibly in a less formal format, and we could just kind of, discuss some of these things that are confusing to us, or some of these things we just can't quite grasp our hands around, and possibly even some of those things that we think that, how can God be this but yet still do this? So we want to look at God's character and His attributes as it pertains to how He's described in Scripture, and we want to make sure that we have a full biblical perspective of who God is and understanding of Him and how He loves us in spite of ourselves. So once again, if you have any questions, don't feel free to reach out to me via email. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I'll be praying for you this week as you continue to um, go through this summer class. And also, I just wanted to just remind you, I know that this is a summer course. I know that you have a lot of things on your plate in addition to the class that you're taking. But if you do have other things like that, please let me know in advance so that we can try to work a way in which you can get your assignments submitted ahead of time. And unfortunately, if you are going to be gone or away for vacation, weddings, missions trips, or anything like that, this is an interactive class, and what that means is that you are very valuable to our discussion. And unfortunately, if you do that kind of work ahead or after the fact, it really kind of doesn't really mesh well. You don't get the benefit of your peers to interact with what you're discussing, and your peers don't get the benefit of your input as well. So please make sure that you get in contact with me well in advance before you plan on taking that time away, so that we can try to work something out so that it is least invasive to and disruptive in the course and for your benefit as well. So look forward to another lively interaction this week, and we'll talk to you soon.